The urn weighed exactly what an urn should weigh. That was the point. For 4 years, a Colorado woman kept it on her mantle. She spoke to it. She grieved over it. Inside was dry concrete mix. Her father was never cremated. Where was his body? The company was called Return to Nature Funeral Home. Penrose, Colorado. Population, barely 3,000. Jon and Carie Hallford sold what grieving families wanted most: simplicity, natural cremations, lower prices than the big chains, no corporate upsell, a husband and wife business you could trust with the person you loved most. Families drove in from across the state. They signed the papers at a kitchen-style table. They paid. And within days, each family received an urn with their loved one's name on it. The cremations had one problem. They were not happening. It started in 2019. A body came in for cremation. It was never taken to a crematory. Instead, it was moved into a building on the edge of Penrose, a plain structure with sealed windows that neighbors barely noticed. Court records would later fix this as the beginning. One body became several. The paperwork never slowed down. Families kept receiving death certificates, kept receiving urns, kept holding funerals on schedule. Inside that building, the count was rising, and the Hallfords kept the front door of the business open. By 2020, it was a routine. Payment came in. Paperwork went out. An urn was filled, weighed, and handed to a family, solemn, exact, convincing. The body went to the building. Prosecutors later described the operation with a cold precision. The Hallfords took money for services they had no intention of providing. Every urn that left their office passed a grieving family's hands without a single question. No one thought to test what was inside. Why would they? The weight was right. The name was right. Everything else was a lie. And the lie was about to be scattered into the sea. Families did what families do. One scattered ashes into the Pacific, saying goodbye over the waves. Another worked them into a rose garden her mother had planted. Others kept their urns close, on mantels, on nightstands, in the quiet corners of houses that suddenly felt too large. Each ceremony was real. The tears were real. The words spoken over the water were real. What they held in their hands was concrete mix from a hardware store. 190 families performing love over a lie they had paid for. Every one of those ceremonies had been paid for in advance, in full, in trust. For the Hallfords, grief was revenue. Then the pandemic arrived and made the revenue bigger. The Hallfords applied for Small Business Administration loans, more than $800,000. The applications were fraudulent. The money did not buy a crematory. It bought cryptocurrency. It bought vehicles. Investigators followed the wire transfers later and found a paper trail that read like a shopping list. While that building on the edge of Penrose filled, the business account drained, into coins, into cars, into a lifestyle 2 funeral directors in a town of 3,000 could never explain. The money bought comfort. The building got none of it. Penrose summers reached 90 degrees, and there was no refrigeration inside those walls. By the 3rd year, the neighbors had started to notice something on the wind, a smell that did not belong to any farm or any season. Some assumed a dead animal. Some assumed a septic problem. The building sat quiet, padlocked, unremarkable. Inside, the count had passed 100. The Hallfords kept selling cremations through the front office. 14 minutes away, in Colorado Springs. The distance was the system. Nobody connects a smell to a funeral home they trusted, and even if someone had, who exactly was supposed to come and check? Here is the part that should have been impossible. In Colorado, at that time, it was not. The state had some of the weakest funeral regulations in the country. No routine inspections of funeral home facilities. No license required to direct a funeral. A barber needed more state oversight than the person handling your mother's body. The building in Penrose was never inspected. Not once in 4 years. There was no inspector to send. All it would have taken was one visit. One door opened. The law never required it. But the smell did not care about the law. October 2023. The smell finally won. A report came in. Investigators drove out to the Colorado Funeral Home's storage building and opened the door. What they found stopped the county cold. Bodies, stacked, layered, left where space allowed. The final count, 190. Some had been waiting since 2019. Hazmat teams worked the scene for days. The FBI flew in specialists who normally process disaster sites. Refrigerated trucks idled on a gravel road in a town of 3,000 people. And in homes across Colorado, 190 urns sat on mantels, still wearing the wrong names. Then came the phone calls. 190 families learned the same fact in the same week. The ashes were not ashes. The woman with the urn learned her father had been in that building the entire time, 4 years, 30 miles from her house. Families who scattered remains at sea realized nothing of their person was in that water. Grief does not run in reverse. They did it all again: identification, waiting, a second funeral. But the worst detail was not the number of bodies. It was the dates. The state of Colorado charged Jon and Carie Hallford with more than 190 counts of abuse of a corpse, plus theft and forgery. The federal government charged them separately for the relief loans. By then, the funeral home scandal was national news. In October 2024, both pleaded guilty to the federal fraud. The plea agreements read like an autopsy of the business itself: money taken for cremations never performed, loan funds converted to personal use, documents falsified for years. There was no claim of breakdown, no moment where the system slipped from their control. Instead, the filings kept circling one detail, a single date buried in the records that turned negligence into something far colder. That date was 2019. The first body was stored within the first months of real operation, which means this was never a funeral business that failed. The failure was the founding act. Nearly every cremation returned to nature ever sold, 4 years of urns, ceremonies, death certificates, was sold after the lying had already begun. The Hallfords didn't break under pressure. They built the pressure into the model: take the money, shelve the body, fill the urn with concrete, and trust that grief never asks questions. For 4 years, they were right. The sentences came down in stages. Jon Hallford, 40 years in state prison, 20 in federal, to run alongside. Carie Hallford, 30 years state, 18 federal. A civil court entered judgment for the families in one of the largest mortuary fraud awards in American history. $950 million. A number that large is a kind of honesty. Everyone in the courtroom knew it would never be paid. The families divided it on paper and went home to houses where the urns used to sit. Some kept them anyway. Empty of meaning, full of concrete, impossible to throw away. The only thing left to fix was the system that let it happen. Colorado rewrote its funeral laws after Penrose: licensing for funeral directors, routine facility inspections. The reforms passed with the kind of speed that only follows catastrophe. Rules that would have ended this with a single knock on a single door in 2019. For 190 families, the timing is the wound. The system that now protects the next family did not exist for theirs. The woman from the mantle buried her father 5 years after his death. The urn she'd spoken to for 4 years did not attend. The Hallfords sold the one product no customer can ever inspect: what happens to the people we love after we stop being able to see them. The state knew its funeral laws were the weakest in the country, and for 4 years, nobody opened that door. So answer honestly, who failed those 190 families more? The 2 people who told the lie, or the state that never once opened the door? One inspection in 2019 would have ended it. Pick a side. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. We tell the stories they buried every week.